said sorry today. Maybe it was for walking through a door at the same time as someone else. Maybe it was for crying in front of someone who made you cry in the first place. You felt the word leave your mouth before your brain even had time to check whether you actually did anything wrong. And the strange part is, you already know the apology wasn't necessary. You knew it the moment you said it. But something in you said it anyway. Something faster than logic, something older than reason, something that kicked in like a reflex before you could stop it. And if you've ever stopped to think about that, if you've ever asked yourself why you keep doing this, you may have received some very unhelpful answers from people around you. They've called you a pushover. They've told you that you have no backbone. They've said you're too sensitive, too eager to please, too weak. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to believe them. Maybe you've started to wonder if there's something fundamentally wrong with you. Some kind of flaw in your personality that causes you to shrink before you've even been challenged. But here's what I want you to sit with before we go any further. What if that reflex is not a flaw? What if it's not weakness? What if it's actually the residue of something your nervous system learned a very long time ago, in an environment where that reflex kept things safe, kept the peace, kept you protected? What if the very behavior people mock you for is actually evidence of something deeply intelligent that happened inside you before you even had words for it? That's what this video is about. And before we go further, I want to say something directly to you. If you have your own story around this, your own version of the apology reflex, I want you to share it in the comments below. Tell me what it looks like in your life. Tell me when it started or what it costs you. Because your comment could genuinely inspire a future video made specifically to help you and people going through exactly what you're going through. So please don't scroll past that. You matter here. Now let's start at the beginning. Most people understand apologies in a very simple way. You do something wrong, you feel guilty, you say sorry. That's the clean, logical version. Wrong leads to guilt. Guilt leads to apology. Simple cause and effect. And if that were true, if the apology reflex really did follow that pattern, then people who apologize too much would simply be people who do a lot of things wrong. They'd be careless, reckless, constantly making mistakes, constantly causing problems. And so their constant apologies would make perfect sense. But that's not who you are, is it? You're careful. You're considerate. You often spend more time thinking about how your words might affect others than most people spend thinking about anything at all. You replay conversations in your head afterward, checking for moments where you might have caused unintentional harm. You notice when someone's mood shifts in your presence, and you immediately start scanning for what you might have done. You are, in many ways, one of the most thoughtful people in any room you walk into, and yet you still apologize. Constantly. Reflexively. For things you didn't do. For taking up space. For existing inconveniently. For having a need that someone else found slightly annoying. For telling the truth at a moment when someone else wasn't ready to hear it. So the simple explanation doesn't hold. The idea that you apologize because you've done something wrong doesn't explain your experience. Because you apologize even when you haven't. And this is where things get genuinely interesting. Because if guilt isn't driving the apology, something else is. And to understand what that something else is, we need to go back much further than your last uncomfortable conversation. We need to go back to your childhood, not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that requires you to excavate painful memories or assign blame to anyone. Just in a factual, clear-eyed way. Because some of the most important things about how your nervous system operates today were shaped in the earliest years of your life in ways that felt completely ordinary at the time. There is a concept in psychology called Fawn Response. It was first described in detail by a therapist named Pete Walker, who worked with people who had survived difficult or unpredictable childhood environments. Walker noticed that the classic 3 responses to threat, fight, flight, and freeze were not the only ones. Some people developed a 4th response. Instead of fighting the threat, running from it, or going numb, they moved toward it. They appeased it. They made themselves pleasing, agreeable, useful, and non-threatening to whoever was causing the tension. They learned, often very early and very quietly, that the fastest way to reduce danger in their environment was to make themselves as easy to be around as possible. Fawn response, in plain terms, is when your body learns to manage other people's emotions before they escalate. Think of it this way. Imagine a smoke detector in a house. Most smoke detectors go off when there's actual smoke. But imagine a smoke detector that was wired to go off the moment it sensed a slight rise in temperature, even before any smoke appeared, before any real danger. It would feel hyperactive. It would seem like it was going off for no reason. But it wasn't malfunctioning. It had simply been calibrated in a high-danger environment. It learned to detect threat earlier, more sensitively, because in that environment, catching things early was the only way to prevent full catastrophe. That's your apology reflex. It's an early warning system. It's your nervous system going off before danger fully arrives, because at some point in your past, waiting for full danger to arrive was too late. Something in your environment taught your nervous system that preventing conflict was safer than surviving it. And the tool your nervous system chose, consciously or not, was preemptive appeasement. Sorry before the argument starts. Sorry before the irritation becomes anger. Sorry before the anger becomes something louder or colder or more frightening. Now, here's the part that most people miss, and it's genuinely important. This wasn't a failure of your character. This was a success of your nervous system. Your brain, particularly a part of it called the amygdala, which you can think of as your brain's alarm system, the part that decides whether something is dangerous or safe, learned a very specific pattern. It learned that when someone around you shows signs of displeasure or irritation, the fastest path back to safety is to take responsibility, to apologize, to smooth things over. That pattern got wired in. It became automatic. It happened below the level of conscious thought, and here's why that's important to understand. Habits that are wired into the nervous system at a survival level don't respond to willpower. They don't care about logic. You can tell yourself 1,000 times that you have nothing to apologize for. You can repeat it in the mirror every morning. You can write it in a journal every night. And then a stranger bumps into you in a grocery store. And before the journal and the mirror and the affirmations can do anything at all, your mouth says sorry. This is not weakness. This is biology. And biology requires a different kind of solution than willpower does. Let's go a little deeper into where this begins, because understanding the origin makes everything else click. When children grow up in environments where the emotional temperature was unpredictable, environments where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where a caregiver's approval felt like it could be withdrawn at any moment, where conflict between adults happened regularly and the child had no power over it but was sometimes caught in the middle of it, the child's brain goes through a specific kind of adaptation. Researchers use a term called hypervigilance to describe this. Hypervigilance, in plain terms, means that your nervous system learned to stay on high alert all the time, always scanning, always checking the emotional weather in the room, always trying to read faces, tones of voice, the way someone puts down a glass, the silence after a certain kind of sentence. A hypervigilant person is essentially running a continuous background program that asks one question over and over, even when nothing appears to be wrong. Is everything okay? Are they upset with me? Did I do something? Should I fix it? Think of it like having a second browser tab always open in the back of your mind, one that you didn't open deliberately and can't quite figure out how to close. A tab that just keeps refreshing, showing you potential social threats, real or imagined, and nudging you to address them before they become serious. Now, in a childhood environment where the adults were emotionally unpredictable, that tab was not just normal. It was necessary. A child who could read the room, who could notice when a parent was becoming frustrated before the frustration turned into something the child had to absorb, that child was safer. That child could intervene, could become quieter, more agreeable, more apologetic, and thereby reduce the intensity of what was coming. The nervous system learned this and rewarded it. It kept using it. It kept sharpening it. And then you grew up, and you took the tab with you. There is also a second layer to this, one that operates slightly differently. Psychologists call it people-pleasing, and they often describe it in a dismissive way, as though people who do it are simply seeking approval out of vanity or insecurity. But the deeper mechanism is much more interesting than that. For many people, and perhaps for you, learning to manage other people's emotional states was not about seeking approval. It was about preserving connection. Because here's something that's true at a very fundamental level about human beings. We are wired for connection. We are not built to survive alone. From an evolutionary standpoint, being rejected from your group, your tribe, your family unit, was not just emotionally painful. It was potentially fatal. In the ancient environments where human beings evolved, isolation was dangerous. You needed people. You needed to belong. And so the brain has a deep, old system dedicated entirely to tracking social belonging. It watches for signs of rejection. It watches for signs of disapproval. It watches for the subtle signals that tell you whether you are still included, still accepted, still safe within your group. And when it detects those signs, when it senses that someone is displeased with you, it triggers an alarm that is every bit as powerful as physical pain. Research by neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA showed that the same regions of the brain that process physical pain, the actual "I just burned my hand" kind of pain, are activated when a person experiences social rejection. The brain doesn't cleanly distinguish between those two experiences at the neurological level. Being excluded hurts the same way a bruise hurts. And so the drive to avoid that pain, the drive to stay connected, to stay approved of, to stay included, is not vanity. It is a survival mechanism. It is ancient and it is powerful, and it operates below conscious awareness. When you apologize to keep the peace, even when you've done nothing wrong, your brain is not making a logical error. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is using the fastest available tool to reduce the risk of social exclusion. The apology is the bridge, it's the olive branch. It's the signal that says, I am not a threat, I am still with you. Please don't disconnect from me. And here's what's heartbreaking about all of this. It works. In the short term, it always works. You say sorry, the tension eases, the other person relaxes, the connection is preserved. Your nervous system gets a shot of relief, and so it learns to do it again next time, and the time after that. But there is a long-term cost, and you probably already know what it is because you've been living it. When you apologize for things that are not your fault, you are sending a message to yourself every single time, without meaning to. The message is my needs, my perspective, my truth matter less than the other person's comfort. And over time, repeated thousands of times across days and years in relationships, that message accumulates. It becomes a quiet belief, a background frequency you live on, a sense that you are somehow the one who should always yield, that your presence in any given situation is something others have to tolerate rather than something you have a right to. That when conflict arises, the fault must somehow, some way, originate in you. This is what psychologists sometimes call a negative cognitive schema. A schema, in plain terms, is a mental template, a default lens through which you interpret events. Schemas are formed early, often before we have the language to question them, and they operate like a pair of glasses you've worn for so long that you've forgotten you're wearing them. You don't notice them because they're not separate from your vision. They are your vision. For someone with a fawn response and a people-pleasing pattern, the schema often sounds something like this. When someone is upset, it's probably because of me. When there's conflict, I should fix it. My role in relationships is to keep things smooth. Taking up too much space makes me a burden. Asking for things makes me difficult. Saying no makes me selfish. These are not true statements, but they feel like true statements. They feel obvious. They feel like just the way things are. And that's precisely what makes them hard to shift. Let's talk about why most of the advice people give you on this doesn't work. If you've ever searched for help with this, you've probably encountered advice like just say no more. Set boundaries. Stop letting people walk all over you. Respect yourself. Just don't apologize when you haven't done anything wrong. And every single piece of that advice is describing the outcome you want. It's just not giving you any access to the mechanism underneath. It's like telling someone with asthma to just breathe normally. The destination is right. The path to get there is completely missing. The reason standard advice fails for people with a deeply wired fawn response is that the fawn response does not operate at the level of conscious decision-making. You cannot willpower your way past a nervous system response. You cannot logic your way out of a survival program. What you can do, and what actually works, is work with the nervous system rather than against it. You can give your brain new data. You can create enough safety in your body that the old alarm system slowly recalibrates. You can learn through repetition and patience and self-compassion to interrupt the pattern at the moment it arises. And there are real, practical ways to do that. Not overnight. Not through sheer force of will, but through something more like redesigning the environment that your nervous system is operating in. Here's the first one. Learn to create a pause between the trigger and the response. Not to stop yourself from apologizing, at least not yet. Just to notice the moment it happens. When you catch yourself saying sorry for something that isn't your fault, don't immediately try to unsay it or correct it. Simply notice it. Say to yourself, silently, there's the pattern. The goal in the beginning is not to be different. The goal is to become a curious observer of your own behavior. This matters because the fawn response operates largely in the dark. It operates below your awareness. And the first step in any real change is simply illuminating what's happening. You can't redesign something you can't see. Over time, something interesting happens when you practice this neutral noticing. The gap between the trigger and the response starts to widen, very slightly, but measurably. The reflex doesn't disappear, but there's a fraction more space before it fires. And in that space, choice begins to become possible. Here's the second one. Start building what some researchers call a window of tolerance. Your window of tolerance is the emotional range in which your nervous system feels safe enough to function without going into full survival mode. For someone with a highly sensitive threat detection system, that window can be very narrow. Small amounts of social tension or perceived displeasure can feel enormous because they're being processed by a system that was calibrated for a much higher baseline of threat. In plain terms, your nervous system is using a dial that goes from 0 to 10, but it was built in an environment where a 3 already felt dangerous. So now, things that other people experience as a 1 or a 2 feel like a 5 or a 6 to you, and your body responds accordingly. The way to widen that window is not to tell yourself that things are fine when they don't feel fine. That doesn't work. The way to widen it is to gradually and gently prove to your nervous system through experience, through actual lived moments, that social friction can exist without catastrophe following it. This means in practice allowing yourself to stay present in moments of mild tension without immediately reaching for the apology, staying with the discomfort, breathing through it, and noticing that nothing terrible happens. Your nervous system learns through experience, not through reasoning. So the proof it needs is not an argument. The proof it needs is a moment where conflict happened, you didn't collapse into apology, and the world didn't end. Here's the third one. Start the practice of self-inquiry after you've apologized unnecessarily. Not in a punishing way, not in a why do I keep doing this, what's wrong with me way, but in a genuinely curious, gentle, almost scientific way. Ask yourself, what did I think was going to happen if I didn't apologize there? What did I imagine the consequence would be? Often, when you sit quietly with that question, something very specific emerges. Not a vague fear, but a very old, very concrete one. The fear that the person would be angry. The fear that they would withdraw. The fear that they would decide you were selfish, difficult, too much. And when you see that fear clearly, you can look at it and ask a second question. Is that fear based on who this person is? Or is it based on someone from a long time ago? Because here's what's almost always true. The person in front of you, the colleague, the partner, the stranger, is usually not the person your nervous system is actually responding to. Your nervous system is responding to a much older template. It's playing a pattern that was written in childhood in a very specific emotional environment, and it's applying that pattern to everyone you encounter now. Seeing that clearly is not a cure, but it is a kind of freedom. Because when you know that the fear belongs to the past and not the present, you can be curious about the present person instead of automatically defensive toward them. Here's the fourth one. Practice what I'd call deliberate non-apology in low-stakes situations, not in big, charged moments. Start small. The next time someone bumps into you on the street and you feel the sorry rising in your throat, pause. Let it be there. Don't say it. See what happens. The other person walks on. Nothing collapses. The world continues. Your nervous system receives a tiny piece of data that says it was safe to not apologize there. And slowly, incrementally, it updates its model. You are essentially training your threat detection system, showing it, through accumulated small moments, that not every instance of potential social friction requires a preemptive surrender. You are widening its tolerance, recalibrating its sensitivity, not destroying the system, but gently tuning it toward the reality of the present, rather than the reality of the past. Now I want to tell you about something that might make you uncomfortable. This process is not linear, and the beginning of it often feels worse before it feels better. Here's why. When you start to reduce your apologizing, when you begin to hold your ground even slightly more than before, the people in your life who have benefited from your compliance will notice. And some of them won't like it. Some of them will push back. They might say you've changed and not mean it as a compliment. They might say you're being difficult or cold or less like yourself. And that will feel painful because the very system inside you that we're trying to work with will hear that feedback and treat it as evidence that you were right to apologize in the first place. That standing your ground was a mistake. That the old way was safer. Do not take that as evidence. Take it as a sign that the work is happening. Because when someone who has benefited from your people-pleasing reacts poorly to you taking up space, that reaction is not about you being wrong. It's about a dynamic shifting. And dynamic shifts feel threatening to everyone involved, including the person who was never on the receiving end of the imbalance. This is one of the most important things to hold on to during this process. The discomfort of growth is not the same as the discomfort of harm. They can feel identical, but they are pointing in completely opposite directions. Let's also talk about something that people almost never address when they talk about apologizing. Let's talk about what it does to your relationships. When you are consistently the one who takes the blame, who apologizes first, who smooths things over before the air has been cleared honestly, you actually prevent real intimacy from forming. Because real intimacy requires both people to be fully present. Fully real, disagreement, tension, even mild conflict, when it's handled honestly, is not the enemy of closeness. It is, in a very real sense, one of the pathways to it. It's where two people discover that they can disagree and still care for each other. That they can upset each other and still want to be together. That their connection is strong enough to hold truth. When you bypass that process by immediately taking responsibility for everything, by apologizing before any real conflict can develop, you rob both yourself and the other person of that discovery. They never learn that you can hold your ground. You never learn that the relationship can survive your honesty. And so the connection, though it may feel very close on the surface, stays at a certain level of depth. It stays in the space where safety is maintained by your surrender, rather than the space where safety is discovered through mutual honesty. The people who love you most deserve to know who you really are, not who you become when you're managing their feelings. There's a term in psychology called self-silencing, and it describes the pattern of consistently suppressing your own thoughts, needs, and reactions in order to maintain relational harmony. Research by Dana Jack, a psychologist who spent decades studying depression in women, found that self-silencing was one of the most powerful predictors of depression, not because silence itself is harmful, but because sustained self-silencing eventually creates a profound sense of inner alienation. A disconnection from your own sense of self, a feeling of not quite knowing what you actually want or feel anymore, because you've spent so long translating your experience into what others need rather than acknowledging what you need. In plain terms, self-silencing is like always speaking a second language and forgetting your first. At some point, you lose fluency in your own experience. You stop being able to tell, clearly and quickly, what's true for you, because the habit of prioritizing other people's emotional experience has become so dominant that your own feelings have been pushed to the margins. This might be why some people with a long-standing fawn response describe a very specific kind of exhaustion. Not just the tiredness of being busy, but a deeper, stranger tiredness. A tiredness that doesn't go away with rest. A sense of having been performing all day without anyone ever seeing the performance. Because when you are constantly managing other people's feelings, when you are always calibrating your behavior to the emotional temperature of the room, you are expending enormous cognitive and emotional energy that no one else can see. You are working constantly at something invisible, and that invisible labor has a very real cost. The world does not see it because the world benefits from it. The people around you experience you as easy, agreeable, pleasant, low conflict. They don't see the machinery behind that presentation. They don't see what it costs you to be that way. And because they don't see it, they rarely think to ask about it. Which means, for many people with a deep fawn pattern, the experience of genuine care from another person can feel completely foreign, disorienting even, when someone asks what you actually want and actually waits for the answer, when someone insists that you don't have to apologize, when someone stays present with you even after you've expressed disagreement or displeasure, the nervous system doesn't know what to do with that at first. It doesn't match the old template. It almost feels suspicious. Because safety, for so long, came with a price. It required performance. The idea that safety could be freely given, without condition, without earning it through compliance, is genuinely new information. And new information takes time to integrate. Give yourself that time. Now let's talk about the reframe. Because everything we've covered so far has described the cost of the fawn pattern. And those costs are real. But I want you to see the other side of this. I want you to see what's actually inside you, beneath the survival adaptation, beneath the reflex that's causing you problems. Because here's what's also true. The same sensitivity that wired you for Fawn Response is also the source of some of the most extraordinary qualities a person can have: the ability to read a room, the capacity to sense when someone is suffering before they've said a word, the instinct to make others feel welcome, seen, and comfortable, the care you bring to your relationships, even when that care has sometimes gone too far in the wrong direction. These are not incidental to your Fawn Response. They are the other side of the same coin, your threat detection system. The one that's been calibrated for human emotional signals since early childhood is also a profound social intelligence. You notice things other people miss. You feel things others walk right past. You are deeply attuned to the emotional undercurrents of any situation in ways that make you, when you learn to use it on your own terms rather than in reaction to threat, an extraordinary friend, partner, collaborator, and presence. The work is not to become less sensitive. The work is to learn to use that sensitivity from a place of choice rather than fear. To let it be something you offer rather than something you're compelled to deploy. There is a particular kind of person who has been through what you've been through and has done the work of understanding it. They often become the most reliable, grounded, genuinely kind people in any group they belong to. Not because they've suppressed what they feel, but because they've learned to feel it fully and still choose their response. They've moved from reaction to intention, from compliance to genuine generosity. There's a difference between apologizing because you're afraid and acknowledging someone's feelings because you genuinely care. Only one of those comes from strength. And the work you're doing right now, just by watching this, just by being willing to look honestly at this pattern, is the work of moving toward that strength. You are not broken because you apologize too much. You are not weak because your nervous system learned to seek peace before conflict fully arrived. You are not less than because the world taught you early that making yourself small was the price of safety. You are someone whose nervous system responded intelligently to its environment, who developed a set of skills, real skills, at significant cost to yourself, because that's what survival required. And now you are in a different environment. An environment where you can begin to learn that safety does not require your silence, that belonging does not require your surrender, that the people who are worth having in your life will not leave just because you finally told the truth. That is the real work. Not to stop apologizing overnight. Not to transform yourself through willpower into someone fearless and unshakable, but to slowly, gently, consistently prove to the nervous system inside you that the old rules no longer apply, that the danger has passed, that you made it out of the environment that taught you those rules, and that you are now free, if you choose to be, to write new ones. Let me give you something you can carry with you. When you notice the apology reflex firing, when you feel the sorry rising in your throat for something that isn't your fault, I want you to try something. Not out loud, just silently, inside yourself. Say something like this: I notice I want to apologize right now. That impulse comes from a system that was trying to protect me. I can thank it for that. And I can also choose to check whether that protection is actually needed here. Is this person safe? Is this situation a real threat? Or is this the old pattern running in a new environment? You don't have to answer the question perfectly. You don't have to always succeed. The practice is in the asking. Because every time you ask the question, even if the sorry still comes out, you are inserting a moment of consciousness between the trigger and the response. And that moment, however small, is the beginning of freedom. The world is full of people who will tell you to be less apologetic in the same tone of voice they use to tell you to just be happier or to simply try harder. They mean well, most of them. But they are looking at your behavior from the outside, without any access to the internal architecture that produces it. They are seeing the output without understanding the system. And advice given without understanding the system almost never helps. You now understand the system. Not perfectly, not completely, but well enough to know that this isn't about character. It's about calibration. And calibration can change. If there's one thing I want you to hold on to when you close this video, let it be this. The fact that you are watching this, that you recognized yourself in this topic, that you were willing to sit with something uncomfortable and look at it honestly, that already tells me something about who you are. It tells me you are someone who wants to understand yourself rather than simply perform yourself. And that quality, that willingness to look inward with honesty and without blame, is one of the rarest and most important things a person can have. It is the foundation of everything that can genuinely change. You are not a doormat. You are not a people pleaser in the dismissive sense that phrase usually carries. You are someone who learned in conditions you didn't choose that keeping peace was safer than speaking truth. And now you are learning in conditions you are beginning to choose that your truth is something the right people in your life can handle. That your truth, in fact, is one of the most valuable things you have to offer. Start there. That's enough for now. If something in this video landed for you, if there was a specific moment where something clicked, I would genuinely love to hear it in the comments. And if you have your own experience with this, your own version of the sorry reflects the specific situation where it shows up most, please share it. Your story matters here. It might become the next video. It might help someone who is struggling with exactly the same thing and doesn't yet have the words for it. If this topic resonated with you, there's a good chance you might also see yourself in a video we made about people who replay conversations in their head long after they're over. That one goes into a similar territory, the overactive mind that can't quite let go, the inner world that processes social moments on a loop, and what that pattern is really telling you. I think you'd find it worth watching. It's right here when you're ready.